My dad once volunteered to pick my girlfriend up from the airport after I broke my leg in a skiing accident. This story is told from their accounts. It was near 11 p.m., and my dad, Russ, was sitting in his car waiting for my girlfriend, Via, to get off the flight. Russ had been sitting there for a while, and the left taillight of the car in front of him had been blinking and flashing randomly. It flittered and blinks, and then he watched a physical spark ignite inside the taillight. It's an older Plymouth, and Russ assumes that it's just wiring. He continues to watch it, though, in case another spark decides to become a flame. Via gets into my dad's car, and right behind her are a couple more passengers from the plane. One is an older man that gets into the passenger seat of the Plymouth. Both cars are pulling out of the arrival lot at the same time. There's a couple mile of highway leaving the airport before getting back to the freeway. The whole time they're following the car with a burnt-out taillight. Then all of the lights in the back end of the Plymouth begin to malfunction. At first, they're watching this light show thinking it's a shame. They're probably going to get pulled over and have no idea why. But then they see the right taillight pop out from the back and bounce on the road, nearly crashing through their windshield. Russ would swerve last minute to avoid the object that was hurling toward them. The highway that they're traveling is a single lane, grass hills on either side. If Russ hadn't been able to correct the car when he fishtailed, Via and him would probably have been killed if they went off that hill at the speed they were going. When the cars align right behind the Plymouth again, their shared anger dissipates into horror as they watch the arm of a small child start to reach out from the hole made in the rear taillight. The arm looks frail or bloody or bruised, all three. They've got it stretched out to their shoulder and they're waving desperately for help. Russ reaches for his cell phone to call the police, but it's dead. Via's phone is almost dead too, but she manages to get the phone call connected long enough to describe the car and part of its license plate. She told them where they were, what they were seeing. When the cars got onto the freeway, the Plymouth picked up speed, and Russ was unable to maintain visuals on the car. He and Via would eventually give up the pursuit 20 miles past their original exit. When they got home and could charge their phones, they filed an official report. They even tried to get information as to if the Plymouth was ever caught or not. We were never able to figure out what happened, but we pray that the police were able to locate the car and help whoever was in the trunk. My parents separated when I was 5, so my memories of when Bio Dad lived with us are fuzzy and incomplete, but I've been told things could get pretty bad. Jim had a serious drug problem. He would take anything he could get his hands on, but meth was his favorite. When he was low on cash, which was quite often, he'd just cook up a batch and sell as much as he could to get by. In case there's anyone who doesn't know, cooking meth is dangerous. It can literally explode. People blow themselves up trying to make it all the time. Needless to say, Mom wasn't very happy when she caught him cooking the stuff in our attic. There were a million other reasons she left him, but that was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Only Jim didn't want to get divorced. He said wedding vows were forever, that if she tried to leave anyway, she would never see me again. Well, that just doubled her resolve. She waited for him to pass out after a big bender, packed our bags, and drove us to Grandma's house almost 2 hours away. Then she left me there and drove all the way back while her brother followed in his van. Jim was still passed out, and Mom knew that he would stay that way into the next day unless someone intervened. After confirming that there were still drugs in the house, they loaded up our car and Uncle Hank's van with as much stuff as they could before calling the police. They didn't know what kind of response to expect, but they were worried they wouldn't be allowed to take anything else once the cops arrived. My uncle waited in a Walmart parking lot. He wasn't a drug dealer, but let's just say he wasn't exactly flying the straight and narrow. He didn't want to cause any trouble for Mom if the police decided to run his name. Things actually went pretty smoothly, all things considered. Jim was rudely awakened from his slumber, and any hope of expressing his anger was completely ruined by the horde of police tearing his house apart. Unfortunately, there was no present evidence that proved he cooked the drugs himself. That would have added a nice chunk of years to his sentence, but he still served 3 years when all was said and done. During that time, Mom remarried, and we moved to a different state where I started school. Not too long after my 7th birthday, Mom learned that Jim would be released in the upcoming months. She didn't think that he would be able to find us and therefore didn't want to scare me for no reason. To this day, she still apologizes for that mistake. Sure enough, Jim was able to find us without too much of a struggle. One day he showed up while I was at recess. This is the 80s, by the way. Security was not the same back then. And he says that he has to take me home because Mom had an accident. I had no clue that he'd been in prison. At that age, I probably didn't even fully understand the concept of it. I just thought my parents got a divorce, and I happened to live with my mom. Jim was now making it sound like because of Mom's accident, only he was allowed to get me from school. I should have known better. My stepdad picked me up all the time, but I was so terrified of losing my mom that I couldn't think of anything else. I just wanted to get to her. I followed Jim right off the playground and hopped into his back seat without making a peep. It didn't even occur to me to talk to a teacher before leaving. Once we were off the school grounds, our speed began accelerating at a terrifying rate. I was already crying silently. The sudden erratic driving scared me to hysterics. While crossing the highway, a big truck had to slam on its brakes to avoid T-boning us. I screamed, and Jim smacked me upside the head. He said if I didn't stop crying, he would make me ride in the trunk. I remember looking around to see that we had left the heavy traffic behind us and feeling a little bit better. I took the opportunity to ask what happened to Mom, but Jim just cranked up whatever tape he was listening to. That's when I started to take a closer look at my surroundings. I hadn't recognized the road that we were on, but I knew one of the ones that came right after it, and we missed the turn for my house. That's when I got really scared. I thought Mom was hurt so badly that she had to go to the hospital. What if Jim was driving like this because he had to get me there before she died? I began crying all over again, lost in mindless nightmares about how awful life would be without a mom. I didn't even notice how much time was passing, but altogether, he had me for over an hour, so it must have been about that long. Then, all of a sudden, there were flashing lights behind us. They'd been announcing a description of us in Jim's car on the local radio stations. Had he been listening to those instead of a cassette, he might have chosen to get off the road, and things could have ended very differently. As it was, a few different people stopped to call the police after spotting us along the way. The police found a map in the driver door. Our route had been traced out, and we were only 20 minutes from reaching our destination, an old landfill. Jim also had a shovel, knew that he could never win custody of me, so he decided to take me away from my mom, the only way that he knew how. That got him a considerably longer sentence than the first, but he died of an overdose in prison just 5 years later. I can't say that I'm sorry.